presentation after me. So we have 90 minutes. I think we have maybe an hour, probably not even an hour for the slides. So plenty of time for interactive discussion too, which was intentional. But I'm curious, before we start, who here has attended? We've done a few mass timber presentations at these Vermont Forestry Summits in past years. Has anybody attended any of those sessions? Okay. A few, but not that many. So that's good because some of what we'll talk about today is a little bit of a recap, but it's also, I think, a good progression. I think this is either the third or fourth time, however many years the summit has taken place, we've done a mass timber session at each of those summits. And it's been interesting to follow over the course of the years how mass timber in New England and mass timber regionally and nationally has continued to evolve, grow, and change. I just got back last night from a mass timber event in Atlanta, and it was interesting to kind of pause and take a moment of reflection in time, like where it seems like sometimes that things grow very slowly. But also, I think if you really step back and look at how mass timber has changed and evolved over the years, I think it's also changed quite rapidly. I've been with Woodworks, the company that I'm with now, for 9 years this month. And when I started, CLT, which is one of the products that we'll talk a lot about today, CLT at that time, so a lot of what I do with construction is based on what the building codes allow people to do. And CLT in September of 2014 was not even allowed just flat out as a building material in commercial multifamily office projects. Like the 2015 IBC was the first time that CLT was even recognized as a product at all. And then fast forward to 9 years from then up to today, we'll talk about numbers of projects. You can use CLT in projects up to 18 stories in the U.S. And 9 years ago, it wasn't allowed to be used in a one-story office building. So if you kind of take a look at it from that perspective, that's where I think that rapid growth has occurred. But certainly there's a lot of pain points along the way, and we still feel, here in New England, that there's room for huge growth still. So that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today is kind of how has that growth evolved, what trends are we seeing here in New England associated with the use of mass timber, and then the fact that there are no local manufacturers to produce locally made mass timber products. So what is going on in the region to try to bolster that up, look at using local New England species in mass timber production. So my background is I've lived in Vermont here for about 15 years. Before that, I lived in Maine. So I've been in New England just about my whole life. I have a structural engineering background. So like I said, I've been with Woodworks for about 9 years. Prior to that, I worked for a structural engineering firm in Montpelier, working on a variety of projects throughout the state, throughout New England. And Woodworks is a national nonprofit organization. So we're a team of architects and engineers, and we're funded primarily by the softwood lumber industry to be a free resource to architects, engineers, contractors, developers, basically anybody who would be looking to use wood, and that could be mass timber, heavy timber, as well as light wood frame construction in any type of construction project, basically other than single-family homes. We don't do much with single-family homes. We do, apartment buildings, hotels, schools, commercial office buildings, and so on. And I'll show a number of those projects throughout the presentation to give you a sense of the types of projects. But because we're funded by the wood industry, all of what we do, we don't charge for any of our services. So we're a free resource to the industry. And I did want to recognize, because of their funding support, our primary funding partners are the Softwood Lumber Board, USDA Forest Service, and Forestry Innovation Investment. The Softwood Lumber Board is essentially it's a checkoff program, is what it's called. So you've probably heard of got milk, beef is what's for dinner, California avocado. Those are all checkoff programs where those industries have a small self-imposed tax on their individual products. That gets pooled together, and then that industry as a whole is represented. So that's the Softwood Lumber Board. That's where they get their funds, and then they distribute funds to 3 organizations, and ours is one of those. Who here has been in a mass timber building? Has anybody come? Great, several hands. I wanted to show this slide to kind of start to give context. When we talk about mass timber, probably if you ask different people, you'll get slightly different definitions of what exactly is mass timber, but kind of in the continuum of wood-based construction. And we're talking about wood as a structural building material. And mass timber is unique in that it's both the exposed finish as well as the structural building materials, kind of the skeleton, the bones of the building. I was noticing the room that we were in this morning. I don't know if that's a timber frame building. There's parts of it that definitely are, but I think most of it was more applied finishes. You know, you see the tongue and groove decking on the underside of the roof. There were beams that maybe they were wood underneath, but they were definitely wood wrapped. So, whereas what we're talking about with mass timber, like on the far right, is you're accomplishing both. It's both the structural framework as well as the exposed finish. So like the equivalent of that building we were in this morning would be like a mass timber building, but instead of wrapping whatever those beams were with, you know, 1x trim, those beams would be something like a blue laminated timber that's both the structure as well as exposed, so you still get that wood look. And then instead of whatever the roof framing was, you saw that on the slope, tongue and groove decking applied on the underside, something like a CLT panel or an NLT panel would be both the structural framework as well as the exposed finish. So it's a bit of a kind of a definition of how we look at mass timber. And comparing mass timber to heavy timber, there's a lot of heavy timber construction in New England and has been for, you know, over 100 years. Basically, the difference between heavy timber and mass timber is that you're creating similar sized elements, so large cross sections, columns, beams, decking, but you're not getting those from a singular tree or log, if you will. So the old adage was large column, large tree. Right? If you needed to form a 12 by 12 column, you needed to find a tree large enough to give you that 12 by 12 column. Whereas with mass timber, you're still making that 12 by 12 column, but you're perhaps doing so with, you know, 8 2x12s or something. You're laminating those together using adhesives, using nails, using screws, using bolts. So that's why you see these are just, I mean, I just made this panel in my garage. This is not a professionally made sample, but this is what's called nail laminated timber. And these are really just 2x4s nailed together, and this is used in commercial applications. Something that's more of a laminated product, something like CLT or glue lam, they're still taking just commodity 2x lumber products, but now it's more sophistication on the production side with presses, with planers, adhesives between each layer, and specific cure times. But essentially, most of the time what's happening is you're using this product, which is called glue lam, glue laminated timber, and that is forming, that's the beams and the columns. So you're kind of creating your structural skeleton of the building, if you will. That's using this glue lam. Right now there is a manufacturer in the Northeast in New York State called Unilam. Ironically, they're bringing in most of their wood is coming from the Southeast. They use predominantly southern yellow pine. So I think that's room for opportunity for local wood species. But glue lam is predominantly forming that structural skeleton. And then, of course, on top of that, we have to have floors to stand on, roofs above us. And so that's usually where a product like CLT, cross-laminated timber, comes in. And as you can see here, as the name implies, they're cross-orienting the laminations. So CLT cross-laminated timber. Usually what's happening is this is a unique panel in that the 3 layers are not equal thicknesses. The top and bottom are equal thicknesses, and the top and bottom are just 2x commodity wood products. Oftentimes they're 2x6s. In this case, the middle lamination is a little bit thinner. Sometimes that's done, sometimes they're all the same throughout. But essentially what you would have is a panel. This panel is square in size. Usually the panels are not square, they're rectangular, and obviously much bigger scale than this. So a 3-ply panel would be a great application for a floor, where you would usually have a panel, you know, anywhere from 8 by 20 up to 12 by 60 feet is the dimensions of the panel. But this is the thickness that you would typically see, maybe up to about 4 inches. So that would be a great application for a floor. Usually then that is, or a roof, that is exposed on its underside, the ceiling side, so you see that timber from the underside. And then the top side, if it's a floor, the top side would be covered typically with first some type of an acoustic underlayment, then a concrete or gypcrete type of poured layer goes down next. It's usually a couple of inches thick, and then whatever the finished floor is on top of that. So that total buildup, should I put that on? Sure. Okay. That total buildup is, you know, anywhere from 7 inches to 10 inches is the total structure thickness And then as opposed to like what we call light frame wood construction, 2x12 floor joists or trusses or I-joists that are more of a repetitive framing system at 16-24 inches on center, these panels are spanning 10 to 15 feet. So there's a beam or a wall every 10 to 15 feet, but in between that it's just this as the structure as well as the exposed finish. And there's a number of variations on all of these products. Yes?
I'm just curious, it's hard to see, is that middle layer plywood or is that just another?
It's just thinner dimensional lumber. We can pass these around if anybody wants to take a look. But that is, I would say, all of the manufacturers in North America produce panels of equal thicknesses. And typically what that is they take a 2x dimensional lumber product, they plane it down to 1 3/8 from 1.5 inches, just to get all of the lumber exactly the same thickness, and to open up the pores a little bit to receive adhesive. So everybody does that. Some also do this, which is unequal laminations. And because it's an engineered wood product, you can really dial in what is the best thickness for a given span and loading situation. So that's why in some cases, if you have smaller dimension trees or if you have lower grade wood, those middle laminations are a great opportunity for that because they don't receive as much stress. Just like in an I-joist or a steel I-beam, where you have your top and bottom of the flanges is where most of the stresses are. It's the same thing with CLT. The top and bottom layers receive most of the structural loading. So that's why those are usually thicker and higher grade lumber. And there's a number of variations on CLT, like NLT is one of them. Dowel laminated timber DLT is another option where instead of nailing these laminations together, you're driving usually a beech, some type of a hardwood dowel between all of them to tie them together. There's even variations on CLT right now. There's 2 manufacturers that produce. One of them is called mass plywood panels. Another one is called veneer laminated lumber, where they're basically creating plywood or plywood equivalents, structural composite lumber, in 1-inch thick billets, and then layering numbers of those together to get a 4-inch, 5-inch, 6-inch thick solid timber panel.
Can you pass that around, please?
Sure.
The other 2?
Yep. We'll pass them all around.
Is there adhesive in the NLT?
There's no adhesive in NLT, no. But there are nails. So this is a glue lamp. There are nails in that. So one of the downsides with NLT, it's one of the upsides is that it's much easier to make. Basically, anybody that's a qualified contractor could make NLT, but because there's nails throughout it, you can't put that through a CNC machine to cut it. So that's where something like a DLT is much more beneficial. It's 100% wood panel. And some people just like it because of the fact that it's 100%